you comment on the personal and principled aspects of the Lincoln-Douglas rivalry? How much did that play in the development of Lincoln's political development, do you think, the debates itself?
Well, much of it had been said before, and after the Kansas-Nebraska bill passed, that's when Lincoln began to attack Douglas and his approach to slavery in the territories. No, he was not well known outside of Illinois at that point in 1858. In fact, Horace Greeley and some of the Eastern Republicans wanted him to step aside, and they thought that Stephen A. Douglas was moving in their direction. That is, he had opposed the Lecompton Constitution, a pro-slavery constitution for Kansas. So they anticipated that Douglas, if we don't challenge him in Illinois, will move away from the Democratic Party and will become a candidate. After all, this was a new party, the Republican Party, and they needed someone with a national reputation, and Lincoln didn't have it. But Lincoln and the Republicans were furious. They'd been fighting Douglas for a long time, and they knew that Douglas had no moral scruples about slavery, and they did. And they also knew that he really was more pro-slavery than the don't care policy, and he operated a plantation for a wife who was deceased now in Mississippi. So Douglas was not, and he was a very strong racist as well, whereas Lincoln was not in that category. But no, out of the Lincoln-Douglas campaign, and it wasn't just the debates. The campaign actually, of course, began with at least Lincoln stated his position on June the 16th, 1858, when he was nominated by the state Republican convention there in Springfield. But then he came to Chicago in early July and followed Douglas, who opened his campaign in Chicago. And it was then that they began to really take on a very vigorous campaign. And they spoke many times, Lincoln more than 50 times, and it wasn't just a set debates. The debates actually didn't begin until Lincoln spoke in Ottawa. Both of them spoke in Ottawa in late August of 1858. But he develops now, and particularly in the West, he becomes a hero in the West among Republicans. And they begin to sense that, well, he's not a radical. So many of them did. He's not in the Seward camp, who could not win because he was viewed as too radical, could not win the lower North, and that was the key. That's where the Republicans had lost in 1856. What's that?
Chase as well, wouldn't you?
Yeah, Chase was too radical. And in fact, Lincoln chastised Chase on one occasion and said, "You people in Ohio have developed a radical platform, the Republican Party there, and that could hurt us. That could destroy us in Illinois."
Yet the Ohioans really gave a boost to Lincoln.
That's right.
And that he went out to speak in late 1859, in Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati. Yeah. And what came of that, besides bringing many to his camp in that regard, that the Republican Party there, the Executive Committee, heard those talks. Lincoln had brought out his scrapbook from that's now in the Library of Congress, of the debates that he had kept and wanted to publish, and you talk about this in your book, that he couldn't find anyone to publish it, but then he came out there with it, and what happened is that the Republican Party there thought that that would be a wonderful way to disseminate their ideations, principles, and their upcoming candidate, hopefully, and they made then the Lincoln-Douglas debates, produced it in Columbus at Follett-Foster. And here's one of those. Interestingly, I'm going to ask you something about his journey to the inaugural. This one was signed to a man named W.T. Bascom, who was on the Central Committee. And here it is, the only known Lincoln-Douglas debates that's actually signed with a date and a place, and as and not as nominee, but as president-elect. But here he is, giving an association copy to Bascom, who really was the one responsible to getting the manuscript, as it were, to Follett Foster and having it published. So he's thanking him in this.
I saw that document, that book for the first time with Lincoln's signature today, and it's a marvelous thing that you have in your collection.
Well, let me ask you, what about the, can you comment on that political element of his journey to the inauguration? What, you know, he had to be careful about policy. And Indianapolis, you speak in your book, how he could have gotten into trouble in Indianapolis, and how did that change him for the rest of the route?
Yeah, well, he made a comment that there's really, if we enforce the laws, is that suppression? Enforce the laws in South Carolina. He had South Carolina in mind at this point. And would that constitute suppression? And he said no. But he made the comment that it was, you know, like a marriage, people don't get along and so forth. He was being too light, which was the way Lincoln sometimes was. And which is a remarkable thing about Lincoln, that's a surprising thing for me. The fact that he always seemed to have an anecdote or a story that was appropriate for the occasion. And it ran some people up the wall, but here in Indianapolis, it was just too much. And then he went on to say, I think it was perhaps later in that 12-day trip across the country to take the oath of office, that it's really no crisis here. It's all artificial. I think what he was trying to do was to say that, look, let's stay calm. Let's stay calm. Let's don't get terribly excited. But that was a big mistake that he made. But still, he had a lot of people who turned out to see him on this trip. And this is one of the things that I thought was very revealing and interesting. That I believe as he went along, he became more determined that he would stand up to secession, even perhaps if it meant armed intervention in the end. Andrew Jackson kind of a thing that Jackson did in the nullification crisis of in early 1830s.
Did Lincoln ever speak of Jackson?
Oh, yes, he did, right, he did. But remember, as a young man, he was in the opposing political party. Mm-hmm. Jackson appointed him to his first position, though, but he was recommended. It was as postmaster. That was the only executive position, you might say, he held. But Jackson's appointment, of course, Jackson didn't know who he was and all, and Lincoln's comment was, I was so insignificant that it didn't matter what my politics was to get that job. A friend recommended him. But he opposed Jackson politically, or the Jackson Party, but still, come 1860, a lot of people were referring to Jackson, stand firm against the secessionists of the South. And Lincoln thought if he stood firm, then they would back down. Eventually, it was all something of a threat here. But by the time he got to Washington, although it's very interesting that there was a real plot against him in Baltimore, which was a slave state. And I recommended that Tom's next book might be on that plot, because a lot of people had thought that it was really just Keystone Cops kind of thing, people who really didn't have any.
But it really was.
Right. Yeah, it was real, yeah. And the evidence is so strong on that. By the time he got to Washington, though, I think he was pretty much determined. He pretty much said so in Pennsylvania at Harrisburg before the legislature. But even a day or two earlier, when he spoke to the New Jersey legislature, which was predominantly Democratic now, and had opposed Lincoln, in that speech, he said something about he might have to put his foot down firmly, and they all cheered. And that was encouraging to him, because he said something to the effect that, it's good that opponents think that this is a wise policy. In effect, he said that. Mm-hmm. So yes, I think that this was an important trip. And of course, the inaugural address has been frequently misunderstood. It was sort of somewhat of a carrot and stick kind of thing.
How was it misunderstood, do you think, the first inaugural?
Because, it depended upon, in the South, I'm thinking about especially, people thought that this is a war message. Even people who said, let's give Lincoln a chance. But this was a little bit too much. I know in my state of North Carolina, when I did work on this period, that there was a movement now to, even before Fort Sumter, to leave the Union, but they didn't quite get around to it because they said this was a war message. And I think Edward Everett said the same thing.
Well, everyone was looking through their own prism, certainly, and we're all trapped in our own reality, whatever the
and of
truth
course, the
might be.
Democrats said this in the North, that this was a war message, whereas the more conservative elements, old Whigs and people in Lincoln's party said no. This is a peace message. But you get around to it, though. How's he going to how's he going to enforce the laws, which he said he would do in that inaugural address? How's he going to enforce the laws unless he uses military power to do so in Charleston, for example? There are not that many federal laws, but of course there's federal property that he said he was going to hold. And furthermore, there was, you've got the revenue laws that were on the books. And how's he going to enforce that without
military force?
Right, and that would not only lead to war, but also probably the upper South, which they did, go out of the Union, and it would aid the secessionists in the border states. Fortunately, the border states didn't leave the Union.
Fortunately.
And that was up
For
to a
Lincoln
great
and the
deal
rest
of
of
the way
us.
Lincoln operated.
Bill, I'm going to put you to work. We
Okay.
have more people wanting to see their books
Yeah.
signed, and I'm going to ask a question, and then we'll get to one from those who are here, which we all appreciate that you all come out. Fleetwood Lindley was a young boy who actually was the last to see Lincoln's face.
Right.
He died in 63, am I right?
Yeah.
1963?
Yep, in Springfield,
And-
Illinois.
In Springfield, and he was the last one to view Lincoln's body and his face. What happened to him afterwards? I know Grace Bedell, when she said that Lincoln should grow a beard, made a cottage industry for the rest of her life, saying, I'm the one that changed the face of history. Well, what did he do? Did he capitalize on that at all?
Not that I'm aware of. He seems to have kept a pretty low profile. His father was one of the members of the Lincoln Guard of Honor, so he was, and one of the last survivors in 1901. So in 1901, at that final reburial where we looked at all those wonderful photos, Fleetwood was 13 years old and he was in school. So the teacher got a note from Mr. Lindley saying, please release my son and tell him to hop on his bicycle and pedal as fast as he can to Oak Ridge Cemetery. And with all the enthusiasm of a boy let out of school early, he was like a bat out of hell. And apparently he went so fast that he literally rolled into the tomb with the bicycle. And he saw Lincoln's coffin on two wooden sawhorses, and he realized what he was going to see. And the two plumbers opened the lid, and everybody clustered around. And there was Lincoln. He was perfectly preserved. The wart on the cheek and the beard on the chin and the unruly black hair. And Fleetwood said later that at the time he wasn't afraid, but for the next 6 months he had Lincoln nightmares. And in 1963, I think it was in January 1963, a Life magazine reporter tracked him down in Springfield. He was still living in Springfield. He was 75 years old, and he was just about to go in for a gallbladder operation. And he told the story to the Life magazine reporter, and they did this spread, 4-page spread with some of the photos that we looked at, and a portrait of Fleetwood from when he was 13, and a new photo of him, a contemporary photo of him. And 3 days later, the poor man died, apparently of complications from the surgery. He's buried in Oak Ridge Cemetery, not too far from Abraham Lincoln.
Oak Ridge is great to go through. You see so many graves of people that we know in the Lincoln world, and it's just as if you know, oh, there's so-and-so, or there's
Right.
someone, and it just, people we've inculcated and know so well. I feel something as I go through for those graves. We're going to have to end fairly soon. I'm going to say a few ending comments, and then we'll continue on for the rest of our time with a question that you have and signing for all of you. I just want to mention that the Michael Betschloss replay will come right after this, if you want to stay tuned for that, of what he was in on Wednesday, and it's an interesting half hour that you might enjoy. And if you want one of those books, we have those signed as well. And if you haven't yet ordered one of these and would like one, we'll certainly have them later on. We appreciate your coming to virtual book signing, and make sure we have your emails. I guess we do, so we can let you know of future programs. And I'm certainly very honored that Bill Harris is here, and Tom Craughwell has also come and been with us for this hour. Appreciate it. Your books are wonderful. I enjoyed reading them. Thank you. So thank you very much for being with us. We're now going to go off the air, but do come back and see some of our archives, and we'll continue on now with the discussion here. So next time, come on in, and you can be part of the discussion even after our hour is done. Goodbye.